in listen-only mode.
Hello, welcome everyone. Happy to have all of you here. This is our session 7, Ethics and Biosafety in Research and the Crosstalk with the Funded Programs. Before we start the session, I would like to brief you about few housekeeping instructions. Any point of time, if you feel a technical glitch, please rejoin the meeting by using the link provided to you over email. And second is, you could post your questions in the chat box at any time during the sessions. We will try to address this as much as possible at the end of the session. I request that anyone who is interested to know more details about these sessions can access through India Alliance social media handles. The details are now displayed on the screen. All right. I would like to walk you through why we planned this session in the conference planning. This is basically about the responsible conduct of research, which is a very important segment of any research program. The crosstalk with funded program starts with the responsible conduct of research, which talks about the scientist as a responsible member of the society. In fact, the ICMR guidelines has an entire section devoted to the responsible conduct of research. The aspects of responsible conduct of research are wide. It starts about the values of research, how to plan and conduct research, the policies involving human participation, animal experimentation, and conflict of interest, publications, data sharing, and international collaborations. From this very broad aspects, in this session, we are trying to address ethics and biosafety involving human participation and a brief about the other aspects of it. I would like to start this session with a abstract presentation by one of our organizers, Dr. Mohammad Manzoor Akil. He is going to talk about the regulatory frameworks in biomedical research in India. Dr. Akil, as I mentioned, is one of our organizers, and he has been a scientist in the Center for Stem Cell Research at the Christian Medical College, Vellore. In his role, he has wide experiences in post-management, grant management support. He has helped with scientific assessment and has also involved in many statutory approval processes and also has worked with international collaborations. He is currently a scientist, clinical research operations specialist at Emmanuel Biosciences in Bengaluru. I would request the talk on regulatory framework in biomedical research by Dr. Manzoor to be presented right now. Thank you. Over to you.
Hello everybody, I am Manzoor, and today I'll be talking about the regulatory framework for biomedical research in India with a particular emphasis on the role of research office. Before I go into the presentation, I would like to thank the organizing team of India Alliance and ARMI for giving this opportunity and putting up this wonderful event. And special thanks to Dr. Savita Iyer for her relentless efforts to get this event ready. Going into my presentation, as we are all aware, the field of biomedical research is rapidly evolving in India, particularly given the fact that the advanced medicinal products are on the rise, particularly the cell and gene therapy products. So that has led to several layers of review, which are mostly sequential. You go one after the other, and as you all know, there are many statutory committees, and to guide them and to help researchers understand those committees and approval, there are several guidance documents. So this has created a complex structure which the investigators usually try to understand, which leads to delays in completing the required process for obtaining necessary approvals. So therefore, it becomes very important for a research office or a research manager to be updated about these processes and the guidelines, the changes in it, and guide the researcher or the scientist or investigator who needs help in getting these processes streamlined and getting the approvals in time without too much confusion. So with that background, this is a broad overview, and I'll be talking about this each committee one by one. So the broad framework in India is there are institutional committees and there are central committees. And the ones shown in brown are the institutional committees and the others are the central committees. So these are the primary committees, but there may be specific committees for different types of research for a specific purpose. But we are not going into that detail in this presentation. But this is to give a high-level overview of what the framework looks like, and if you need further guidance, where you should approach and get further steps to done. The first review that happens for any research proposal is the Institutional Review Board or the Institutional Ethics Committee, the IRB or IEC. The purpose here is to review all research. So why I emphasize on all research or any research is that whether it's research office or the scientists, they tend to decide on themselves whether they need what particular kind of approval or not. So it is best to avoid the situation, because if you think your research, you are doing research, best to apply for the IRB or IEC clearance, and they will then decide whether it really needs clearance or no. So that is the first point where you will get the best guidance, because that committee is empowered to take such decisions. And depending on the type of research that is conducted or reviewed by that committee, the registering authorities vary. In case the IEC or IRB is reviewing only biomedical research, and biomedical research by definition means that any research of biomedical nature which does not include clinical trials. So clinical trials are exempted from the biomedical research definition here, because clinical trials are separately regulated in India, particularly through a CDSCO, through the Drugs and Cosmetics Act. That's why that registration is exempted. Kept separate. So if your IEC or IRB is reviewing only biomedical research, not clinical trials, then they're registered with DHR. If clinical trials are reviewed, then it's mandatory that you get registered with the CDSCO. These are a few guiding documents. There are several more, but these are the main documents which a research officer or a research manager can go through and understand the process and ensure that those requirements are fulfilled. The National Secretariat will be at the DHR or CDSCO, depending on the registering authority. And this is the broad composition. More details are in the guiding documents. And the main role of research office or the manager here would be to ensure that the compliance adherence requirements are fulfilled. Make sure the reviews happen on time, especially if you're doing clinical trial, the SAEs, the serious adverse events are reported, and any other related matters that you need guidance from the IEC or IRB. A special mention about the State Ethics Committee. Maybe most of the institutions that you are working in do not need this, but if projects involve a large community or a population or a statewide approach, then it is important that you approach a State Ethics Committee of the state government to get those clearances. Moving on, the next will be the Institutional Animal Ethics Committee or the IAEC. This is required if your research includes small and large animals. And the registering authority is the CPC SEA, and these are the guidance documents. Here also a similar structure, but one important thing to note here is the CPC SEA nominees that are mandatory in the quorum and in the committee. So without them, you cannot actually have this meeting. And some special requirements of IAEC in terms of compliance adherence are the regular meetings and inspection reports that you have to submit. So this compliance adherence for all committees that we will talk today is important to keep the registration active and the constitution of the committee valid. Otherwise, it becomes difficult for continuing review of your research projects and other matters in your institution. And the Institutional Committee for Stem Cell Research is particularly required when your research involves human stem cells. I'm emphasizing human stem cells here because if you are using animal stem cells with no human component, so then you do not need this committee approval. There is a lot of confusion that goes on. So it is this committee is particularly for human stem cells. And the registering authority will be the NAC-SCRT, and the guiding document will be the National Guidelines for Stem Cell Research. Now the current version is 2017. There are several previous versions and few revisions may come up in the future. And similar compliance adherence requirement that you make sure that your registration is active and you file documents that are needed. And this is the broad composition. And one thing must note that this is the most independent committee of all committees, because except the member secretary who is allowed to be from the institution, no one else should be from the same institution. So this makes this committee more independent and empowered. Going to the national, so the ICSCR is the institutional level, and at the national level is the NAC-SCRT. Here, the emphasis is on the human stem cells in restricted areas. So if you see the national guidelines for stem cell research, there are 3 categories of research: permitted, restricted, and prohibited. In general, permitted means you can do with your IRB, IEC, and the ICSCR clearance. If you need to do research in restricted areas, then along with those institutional committees, you have to approach the NAC-SCRT to get those reviews done. And prohibited areas, it means you cannot do that research, so there is no question of approval. And this flowchart we had made when I was managing the NAC-SCRT secretariat several years back. This basically gives an overview at what level you need what kind of approval. I'll come to a similar kind of summary at the end of the presentation. The next is the Institutional Biosafety Committee. If your research involves any biohazardous material or genetic modification of cells, then you need to get this committee approval mandatory. And the registering authority is the RCGM, which is established by the Department of Biotechnology. And this committee has several documents. If you see their website, the link is below. There are several documents for reviewing, helping people understand what the requirements are. But I have listed out the major handbooks and rules which will make the scientific and biomedical research organizations understand this easily. And the secretariat is, as I mentioned, is the Department of Biotechnology. And this committee mandatorily needs a DBT nominee and a biosafety officer in its quorum. That's the broad composition. And they have a nicely built, fully online portal where all interactions takes place. So this is a total paperless committee, from the registration to the minutes and getting approvals and all that happens online. And now, even after the COVID pandemic, they have stopped even receiving any kind of papers. So that's a wonderful type of arrangement. And this is just a glimpse of the flowcharts I have extracted from those handbooks. I mean, what I am trying to say here is they have provided nice overviews of the processes and flows that one should follow. If you read the handbook, any investigator or a research office manager will understand more clearly how their processes work. And their national body is the RCGM. So along with the IBSC and RCGM, there are several committees like the RDAC, the Recombinant DNA Advisory Committee. It advisory in function, which is in the background. We don't actually get in touch with them. The IBSC, RCGM, and the GAEC are the ones which we actually get in touch and deal with for approvals, because they have the regulatory and approval functions. And the SBCC, that is the State Biosafety Coordination Committee, and the DLC, the district level committee, they monitor these biosafety aspects at the state and district levels. So the emphasis is on the right side, the flowchart. What you can see, the category and the risk group classification, which is again in the handbook. So it is very nice to see that, you know, the risk group 1 and category 1, those experiments you can do with IBSC, and some part of even category 2 risk to group 2 can also be done with the IBSC approval at present with the new rules that were released a few months back. But if it goes beyond risk group 2, then it is mandatory that you go for RCGM clearance, and you cannot do that with only IBSC approval. And also, when you are getting into the clinical application, the clinical trials, then it is mandatory that you start the RCGM application at the preclinical level itself, because without the RCGM NOC, you cannot get to the DCGI clearance for the clinical trial. And this is also one flowchart extracted from the handbook. You know, form C3, C5, B1, B3, B. There are several forms which are designated very clear. So the research office, if they are aware of these processes, it will be wonderful, and they can guide the scientists very well. Okay, the Health Minister's Screening Committee, this, if your research involves foreign collaborations or you want to exchange material outside India, then you should get this clearance done. So some guidelines are available on the ICMR website. These are quite old, but still valid. The mechanism here is if your institution is under the Government of India agencies, or your INIs, the Institutes of National Importance, then they can follow these guidelines and grant the approval for their institutions and send the information to HMSC for endorsement. That's the mechanism. But in case of private institutions who do not have a government administration body, then they have to directly approach the HMSC with their proposal and get the proposal. So the logic here, what I understood from one of the senior persons of the HMSC, was that when a government institute gets something approved, or the INIs get something approved, they have the level of approval of a person equivalent to a secretary of the government, secretary to the Government of India. And the HMSC is also chaired by a person who is a secretary at a level of the secretary to the Government of India. So when both approvals come at the same level in terms of the authority in the bureaucratic hierarchy, so it doesn't need extra approval from HMSC. So that's the logic of allowing government institutions and their departments to grant that approval by themselves and send the information to HMSC, because the ICMR headquarters currently is the secretariat, so it all should be at one place. So that's the logic behind it. Coming to the last one, if your research is involving drugs and cosmetics and clinical trials, then you should get the CDSCO approval. That commonly, people also say is the DCGI approval, the Drugs Controller General of India. Important definitions here which I have listed, which any research office should know to classify a new drug and an approved drug, a new clinical trial and academic clinical trial. A new drug in context of clinical trials in Indian regulation always means a drug which is not approved in India. A clinical trial means clinical trial of a new drug. So it is first time being done in India. If it is called approved drug, then it means it's already approved, and you can do an academic clinical trial only with an approved drug. So you cannot do academic clinical trial. Academic clinical trial takes importance because it does not need an extra CDSCO clearance. So that's why if somebody comes and tells you that I want to do academic clinical trial of the new drug, So that does not go well, because by the rules, they have clearly specified that academic clinical trial means it should be a clinical trial of the approved drug only. If it is new drug, then you get the DCGI or the CDSCO approval. And the term clinical trial NOC, so it's actually not an approval which the CDSCO gives. When you apply for a clinical trial, CDSCO issues a no objection certificate that they do not have objection to for you to conduct the clinical trial. And many people, if your institute is involved in clinical trials, you may hear that the certification of manufacturing facility is required. So that is a total wrong term. I wanted to specifically mention this because CDSCO never uses this word in their rules, and they have clearly said it won't be a certification; it will only be a NOC, and the state FDA is the one, your local state FDA is the one who will inspect in collaboration or in consultation with CDSCO, and they are the one who will give you a license to manufacture. So there is nothing called as certification, because even if you try to apply to CTRI, there is some confusion there also, the Clinical Trial Registry of India, where they will ask you for this certification, and then you can actually explain to them saying, see, this is not the right term and this is what the license we have got, and you can always explain and they will accept. So we have experienced that. And the major guiding documents for clinical trials is the Drugs and Cosmetics Act, and with the new drugs and clinical trial rules of 2019, things have become more clear and streamlined. Coming to the summary, so when anybody comes and asks you, then you have to ask these questions. Is it research? If yes, go to IRB, they'll guide you. If then you ask the next question, are the animals involved? Are human stem cells involved? Is any biohazardous material involved? Is any overseas participation involved? And if it's a clinical trial. So depending on these questions, one by one, you can decide what approvals are required. And if somebody is developing grant management software, you can incorporate this logic when you are creating a project file, and so that the record is already maintained and the management system will notify you when these approvals are not in place. If all of these are no, then you have to see whether you are really doing research or something else. Then you have to follow other institutional processes as is required. So I'll stop there. I know this is a recorded presentation. If you have any questions, you can always email it to me. This is my email address, and anytime, I mean, whatever experience we have got, I'll be happy to share. So again, I thank everybody for your time and listening. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Manzoor. Thank you for the exhaustive presentation and walking us through the regulatory framework involved in biomedical research. We will proceed to the panel discussion. This panel discussion is structured in such a way that we want to have representation from the regulators who help frame guidelines in our country and the investigators who are required to comply to the regulations, and the research managers who help work with the investigators to enable implementation. I will introduce the panelists. We have with us Dr. Vasantha Muthuswamy, who is the former Deputy Director General of Indian Council of Medical Research, and she is the President of the Forum of Ethics Reviews Committees in India, and she is the Chairperson of the COVID Ethics Committee. Welcome, Dr. Muthuswamy. And we have with us also Dr. Rolly Mathur, who is the Scientist F and Head of the Bioethics Unit at the National Center for Disease Informatics and Research and ICMR Institute at Bengaluru. And she is the Member Secretary of the COVID-19 National Ethics Committee. Welcome, Dr. Mathur. We have with us, representing the clinical research investigators, Professor Shinjini Bhatnagar, who is a Professor of Eminence at Translational Health Science and Technology Institute. She heads the Maternal and Child Health Program at the HSTI, which is one of the translational research program. She's also a program coordinator of Garbini, which is one of a kind of a large longitudinal cohort of pregnant women and has been identified as a mission program by the Ministry of Science and Technology. Welcome, Professor Bhatmakar. We have with us representing a researcher as well as a research administrator, Dr. Pooja Sharma, who is the Associate Director and Head of Medanta Education and Research Institute, representing a private institute here. And she, in her capacity, also is the Member Secretary of the Medanta Institutional Ethics Committee. She wears both the hats of a researcher as well as a research administrator. Last but not least, we have with us our own IRMI Fellow, Dr. Badri Datta, who is a Senior Research Manager at the George Institute of Global Health India. She has a wide experience, a decade of experience as a research manager, working with DBT Wellcome Trust, Public Health Foundation of India, and also as the Indian Institute of Health Research Management. Welcome, Madhuri. We will start this panel with a few of very pressing questions directed to our panelists. I will first request Dr. Muthuswamy to respond. Dr. Muthuswamy, you have played a prominent role in enabling release of guidelines involving stem cell research and human participation research in India. We all know that these guidelines has to be implemented at the institutional level by various committees, which have to operate with independence as a pillar of operation. Can you please brief us about how these committees are empowered with these regulations to enable ethical research in our country? Over to you, Dr. Muthuswamy.
Yes, thank you, Vidya. Thank you for involving me in this very interesting webinar. And it's a very needed one because people have to be very clear about the role of regulations and the guidelines in whichever capacity they are involved in research. Yes, you are absolutely right that we have the, if you take the two examples which you have given, the stem cell research guidelines and the biomedical research ethical guidelines. Now, both these are there for the use of all the stakeholders. Okay, it is the researchers have to be aware of it. The ethics committee members, the different committee members have to be aware of it who are going to give the approvals, as well as the regulators. Now, if you look at the, of course, when you see now it's good which has happened in this country is that earlier we had all guidelines. All these guidelines were developed by ICMR, and all these have come out of my department. Both the stem cell guideline and the ethics guidelines, even the animal ethics guidelines and everything. So when these were only ICMR guidelines, and then we had a regulation which is running parallel, which is the CDSCO, the drug regulations. So that under the drug regulations, of course, the clinical trial, what was explained in the video presentation, there is one clarification I want to give to everybody. Of course, the speaker is very well aware of it. Probably there might have been some confusion among the listeners. He clearly demarcated the role of the two agencies, the Department of Health Research and the CDSCO, where he said that all the biomedical and health research will be under the Department of Health Research, while all clinical trials will be under the CDSCO. Well, in a way, it's correct that the CDSCO looks at clinical trials. It's not that all the clinical trials are looked after by the CDSCO. If you see, the CDSCO has the new drug clinical trial rules, and earlier the Drugs and Cosmetics Act, and the rules were there. So whatever is the definition of a drug according to the new drug clinical trial rules, which is called the new drugs, only those who are doing a regulatory trial, which comes under the description of the new drug, and for which there are 5 different headings, which is for new drugs, which the new rule says. So that which are covered under these 5 only constitute a clinical trial for which you have to go to the CDSCO for registration and approvals. Well, when you see any research institution all over the country, they do large number of, if you take all the MD, MS, TCs, many of the research work which is going on as a clinical trials comparing 2 compounds which are already there, they are not regulatory trials. These are trials which are conducted by the using the drugs, we are already in the market. They are also clinical trials only. So these don't go to the CDSCO. They come under the jurisdiction of the DHR only. So these people have to be clear as what is the meaning of a clinical trial according to the CDSCO, and what is the overall meaning of a clinical trial. So if you look at the clinical trial as a whole, out of which 20% only is regulatory trial, and only for that 20% the CDSCO is responsible, while the remaining 80% of the clinical trial which is happening in the country comes under the Department of Health Research. This is something which everybody has to be very clear. And with all these guidelines which happened for the last so many years, last 20 years, we are coming out with some guidelines or the other, and each guideline is getting updated. And we have committees within the institutions. The stem cell committee, institutional stem cell committee for research is there. Then you have the IEC or the institutional ethics committees are there. First, we tell them they have to take care of all these guidelines. But now with the new NDCT rules 2019, which has been released in 2019, there is a wonderful thing which has happened, which we have been working for so many years, and finally it happened. When there is a merger of all these, the two parallel activities are going on have now come together. Now, so if you look at that, when you see that the stem cell committee, under the definition of the new drug definition, there is a component called stem cell derived product. Now this is considered as a new drug by the regulators, and so it is under the new drug rules. So anybody doing work with a stem cell derived product, they have to go to the drug regulators, get approval and do the studies. That committee has to give approval for that. But if the same stem cell research, if a basic research is going on in the institution, which is not actually coming to the clinical trial stage, and that is also to be reviewed by the institutional stem cell committee, where that doesn't go to the CDSCO, but then all the institutional stem cell committees have to be registered with the National Apex Committee for Stem Cell Research and Therapy, which is called the NACSCRT. So there is a clear-cut distinction of role between where all the CDSCO steps in for the regulation, and all the rest of the activities are now regulated by the DHR, because now when we say that they have made this two different, under the section 4 of the new rules, there are two components. One is all the regulatory clinical trials will go to CDSCO, all other biomedical and health research will be registered by the Department of Health Research. They have to follow SMR guidelines 2017 and it's further updating. This is what they have given. So now that it has become part of a single rule, so as I said, there is a convergence has happened. Only thing is we have to be aware of where is the difference. So the Institutional Stem Cell Committee for Stem Cell Research or the Institutional Ethics Committee for looking into all the biomedical and health research, including the clinical trials, are reviewed by the same ethics committee, only reviews everything. So that ethics committee, which does not look into a regulatory trial, they need not be registered to CDSCO. So sometimes at the moment, as the present level in the country, there are some institutions which do both, have to be registered at both the places. Dr. Rowley and the team are trying to harmonize this to see that there will be one single registration, but at the moment, people need two registration, which is very clearly given in the rules also. Okay. So institutions, the institutional committees follow the guidelines, conduct the research. They are registered with both these regulatory agencies. And actually, when a registration happens, certain conditions have to be fulfilled. People are following it. So that's how the guidelines and the regulations have come forward. So all the committees are under the regulatory mechanism now. And this is a very good sign because people know that, what is the quality that should be maintained for the functioning of various committees, approvals which they are given, because these are all under overall regulations.
Thank you, Dr. Muthuswamy. Has any changes has been brought forth by this pandemic? Like what changes in the regulations have been brought forth by this pandemic?
If you look at the changes, the regulations are remain the same. Okay, there is no changes in the regulations as well. Regulations are remaining the same. The drug regulation, if you see, it is a 2019 drug regulation, and if you see the guidelines also, they are all there. The only changes which have happened is the way the committees function. For example, the ethics committee, the way the ethics committee should function under the current pandemic, because earlier the physical meeting of the members was mandatory. Although we have given in the 2017 ICMR guidelines that in case of humanitarian emergencies, you can consider electronic procedures, but now a time has come that you have to look into the new ways of meeting, the new ways of contacting the patients or the participants, new way of taking informed consent. So the ICMR came out with the guidelines in April 2020 itself when the pandemic started. It's a guidelines for ethics review committee, especially during the pandemic, as to how to conduct the review and give the various approvals. So there are guidelines are there, which is in the present situation, which says that how do you modify the way of functioning. And of course, as far as regulations are concerned, of course, the drug regulators, what they have done at the moment because of the present situation is, instead of going through the usual procedure of regulations, which takes months together, sometimes maybe even years together to come to decision, unfortunately, in the 2019 guidelines itself, there is a clause which is newly introduced, was an accelerated approval of therapeutic products by different mechanisms. And that came out in 2019. Of course, at the time, nobody expected that within 2020 itself, you have to implement it. So that particular clause is now implemented in the giving approval for the various, therapeutic products which are used in the COVID situation, and the new vaccine approvals which are all being given at the moment, both the Covishield and the Covaxin in this country, and they have followed this accelerated approval mechanism. So these regulations were already there, but only thing is they were able to implement these new things only now. And as far as the guideline of functioning, of course, we issued a new guidelines. Of course, this is a very dynamic area now. I think always we say ethical guideline is a very dynamic area. That's why from 2000 we changed to 2006. We made it updated in 2017. Now we have come out with something in 2020. I think very soon we'll have to merge all these things and come out with something else may happen, and you may have to come out with a new way of looking out the same old things, so that how do you make your life easier? How do you make the functioning of the ethics committees easier? How do you make the researchers' life easy, that they are not put into so much of restrictions? And we have had interesting discussion with people, that those who are doing research, what are the difficulties they face and how they are able to overcome those difficulties and still function and carry out with their work. And so these are all the very dynamic changes which are continuously going on.
Thank you, Dr. Muthuswamy. Now I have a few questions to Dr. Rolly Mathur. Whenever we have any queries and questions regarding the functionings of the ethics committees, we always bother you. And thank you for being so accommodative of our constant pestering. So what has come out relatively new and impactful is about the conduct of biomedical and health research in our country, which is like through the new drugs and clinical trials rule. Could you please brief us about the aspects of what it says and what is eventful or impactful about it?
Thank you very much. I think this is a very well-planned program, and I'm really glad that these topics are being discussed, because these are certain things which have been under the shelves. And congratulations for taking up head-on about research governance issues. So as Dr. Muthuswamy has very nicely already explained a bit about the new drugs and clinical trial rules and how it has impacted biomedical health research, but I would just briefly again mention that Ministry of Health and Family Welfare had notified the new drugs and clinical trial rules 2019 with the aim to promote clinical research in India. And it has actually changed the regulatory landscape for the approval of new drugs and the conduct of clinical trials. And for the first time, it has also included biomedical and health research in India also into the purview of the new rules. And therefore, through an indirect mechanism, the ICMR national guidelines have become regulatory, which is that you need to follow ICMR ethical guidelines for all biomedical health research in India. So there is a whole chapter number 4 which has been created, which has created provisions on ethics committees for biomedical and health research, and these have been made effective with effect from 21st of September 2019. 180 days time was given after the rules came out in March for the implementation of this, because a new structure of governance was being created, a parallel structure. We had a structure in place for clinical trials, for regulatory clinical trials, which require marketing approval, but then a whole new parallel structure has been created now at the Department of Health Research, where the Ethics Committee Registry has been set up. It is a new portal that has been created. It's called the NETHIC portal, and the National Ethics Committee Registry for Biomedical and Health Research has been set up, and an office has been set up for the same at DHR. Now, as we all understand generally, is that new drugs and clinical trial rules are applicable for new drugs and clinical trials, DAB studies, and on. But we need to also understand that now it also includes all kind of other researches, academic clinical trials or academic studies, biomedical health research. And in fact, biomedical health research, because when you look at the definition of that, you would find that it also includes socio-behavioral research which relates to health. So indirectly, even socio-behavioral research that relates to health is now covered in this. So it is actually a huge, huge umbrella, and that awareness needs to be created that, you know, it is a whole umbrella, and clinical trials are a part of it, regulatory clinical trials are part of it, socio-behavioral research is a part of it, basic science research, epidemiological research, implementation research, you know, every kind of biomedical research is under that whole umbrella. So now these rules have superseded, you know, the Schedule Y and others. So this is what we will look. So this, the whole mechanism was to create one, you know, single document that would provide a good overview. It has also included definitions of some of the newer terms, you know, like it has discussed about stem cell derived products as mentioned by Madam, gene therapy products, xenografts, orphan drugs, sorry. So all these are also included. And when we look at the definition of biomedical health research, it says that biomedical health research includes studies on basic, applied, and operational research or clinical research designed primarily to increase scientific knowledge about diseases and conditions, physical or socio-behavioral, their detection, causes, evolving strategies for health promotion, prevention or amelioration of diseases, and rehabilitation. And, you know, so it's a very large, you know, over-encompassing definition. About the ethics committee, so any institution or organization that intends to conduct any of this biomedical health research should can have an ethics committee to review and oversee that research, and detailed in the National Ethical Guidelines of ICMR and as updated from time to time. And ethics committees shall be constituted in accordance to the national guidelines has been mentioned. Now, the ethics committee that has to function has to be registered with the authority. And Dr. Muthuswamy has very nicely explained that if an institution is conducting a trial that is regulatory in nature for marketing approval of new products to be introduced in the market, then it needs registration with CDSCO, and then all the rest of it will also additionally need a registration with DHR. So all kind of biomedical health research, including clinical trial. The provisional registration is initially being granted for 2 years, but and then on a provisional basis, but then a formal registration will be done. So this, all these processes are evolving, and we tried best to sort of harmonize the requirements for registration so that ethics committees don't have to overwork. So the requirements for submission that are there for CDSCO have been replicated, and the same requirements are there for registering with DHR. We have not been able to make a common portal, but portal is different now. Initial plan was to have one common portal, but then now the portal is different because there are 2 different authorities who have to monitor and have an oversight. So there are 2 different portals, but the system is the same. The you know, format is the same. So thank you. I think if there are questions, I will further explain. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Madhur, the ICMR guidelines has detailed the roles and responsibility of each member in the ethics committee. Considering that this is a conference regarding research enablers, research managers, could you please, from your viewpoint, how would a trained secretariat help this process?
I think that's an extremely important question, because as like Pooja is nodding and she knows, as you know, running the secretariat of an ethics committee is often the most thankless job, but it is a tough, very tough job. And so it's an important question. Thank you for raising that. So the training of, we have been focusing only on training of ethics committee members, but training of the secretariat, and that includes, you know, of course, member secretary and the other members who, you know, people who help, the staff who help the member secretary run the office is also very important. And let us see what are the kind of functions that the secretariat has to perform, and then accordingly they need to be trained. So first and foremost, we understand that the Secretariat has to be informed and they have to help the PIs in making the submission process, in keeping the members of the ethics committees updated about the new regulations, new guidelines, new SOPs, processes, procedures of submission and review. So, they have to first understand all this to be able to guide the researchers in that institution as well as the ethics committee members to be updated. Then the Secretariat has to often maintain a website. Most of the ethics committees now are planning to have online systems for submissions, and they have to run a website and to keep it updated, to provide public access to certain information. So that is another responsibility. They have to manage timely submission of the protocol, get it reviewed in time to be sent out to the members, identify who would be the primary reviewer, secondary reviewer. Is there a need to invite any independent consultant or special invitee depending on the topic of the research? And then they have their own checklist to go through whether the submission is complete. Because unless the completion is the submission is complete, the ethics committee does not find it good enough to be able to review, because they would return it back that this information is missing. So there is a pre-meeting review which is so important and has to be done by the Secretariat to ensure this completeness and missing documents. Then the Secretariat has to prepare for the meetings, whether it's physical and now online meetings, plan prior scientific review, peer review if required, and also to categorize whether the proposal will fit into the exemption category or expedited category, or fill review, whether it fulfills the requirement for waiver of consent. So, all this groundwork has to be done. Then they have to also, once a study is approved, get the timely annual reports or continuing review reports. If there are any adverse events that are reported, they have to collect the same and, take action within a time span which is specified. So there are a lot of corrective actions, monitoring, review of amendments, violations, and all kind of activities are happening. Preparing a budget for their own office and their own annual reports also, record keeping, filing, correspondences, they have to maintain all correspondences, arrange training of the members of ethics committee as well as researchers of the institution, management of conflict of interest, ensuring quorum during the meeting, filing, preparing minutes and filing them. And in also a good ethics committee secretariat would plan community outreach and being a liaison between the ethics committee and researcher, and to note any public concerns or public outcry or media reports to be brought to the notice of the ethics committee members. And so a lot of work, and then there is file management, which has to be, documentation has to be complete. Unless it is documented, it is not done. That is the formula that we all learn. And then maintaining confidentiality of all these documents, with whom they can share what, and maintaining SOPs, their updation, communication, archiving, being alert and keeping the ethics committee members alerted. And so, like you said, responsible is the word. They have to be very, very responsible. And for doing all these functions, they need very good training and repeated training. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was an excellent highlight. Now I have questions directed to Professor Bhatnagar, who in fact has mentored me into this role from the very beginning of assuming the position in Translational Health Science and Technology Institute. Dr. Bhatnagar, being the coordinator of a large clinical research program, has to coordinate various collaborations, not only within the country, but also outside the country. And at a time, she works with many institutions. I would take this opportunity and request her that as a researcher who has to run research and also has to comply with the regulatory requirements, what is her view in having a common ethics review process to ease out a lot of the burden of the compliance, and give her view on that?
Thank you, Vidya. Firstly, I must say that, like Rolly said, it's an excellent panel because it's giving both sides to a complex situation, and you managed to get everybody on board to give very different aspects of this problem. I began research in 1983 or 84, I think, 84. So it goes back over 3 decades. And I must say we've seen this whole scenario change, and Dr. Muthuswamy has been a part of this whole journey, and so has Roly and Pooja. You know, we've seen as investigators, seen things change. Ethics committees played a very small role in the early mid-80s, and then gradually we saw how this whole role grew. And now it's grown to such a level that at times it is complex for the investigator. So while one agrees completely that it's very nice how this system has grown, how there's so much accountability, how all of us have to be very careful with the way we are doing our research, on the other hand, there are challenges, and particularly these challenges come when you're trying to do large multi-institutional programs, and that pretty much is today's requirement, that unless you have collaborations and unless you have people working together, you're not going to be able to answer these large complex problems. So what we've faced is that when we've done these large multi-institutional programs, and you had, like, say, 6 ethics committees to deal with. Now, each ethics committee has its own, so it begins with the submission of the application. Each ethics committee has a different format, has different points that have to be emphasized, different way of approaching the ethics committee. So you first finish all those 6 to 7 applications. I'm telling you from real life experience. You know, we have a large multi-institutional program which has 8 institutions. So you can imagine, we have gone through, so you begin with each application and then you submit that. So that itself is a process which takes very long. And I think ICMR and Roly have led a fantastic initiative in creating a common ethics form, right, Roly? And that form actually is, it's really a good way forward, because you have a common standard form where you apply to all ethics committees in that same manner. And that, if it can get implemented across the country, I mean, you know, at least across the country, our lives of our investigators will be much, much simpler. So while it's being implemented in some institutions, it's not. However, if that is I mean, it'll, I guess, reach there someday, Roly, I hope so. And, but at some stage, you know, even if in a form, there are some standardized ways of entering that form, even if those guidelines can be standardized, that the way you're submitting for a particular study, let's say an observational cohort, these are 5 things which have to be there. These are standard things. And if all these parameters, there are guidelines for these parameters, and all ethics committees go by those guidelines, I think it'll make a huge difference, you know, because in some situation you just highlight objectives, in some you're going to work on the consent form. So, you know, I mean, of course, there are many, many examples. So I think that is one area which certainly needs much more interaction, inputs. There is some work towards it. And as investigators, we would be very happy to see an ideal common form being followed by all the ethics committees. The second thing is the review process by the ethics committees. Now, again, I'm giving you an example. We had 8 ethics committees. So you begin with the first one, then you go through all 8. By the time you've reached 3, you've got changes which 1 and 2 have suggested. So you start the process all over again. And by the time you have finished getting your ethics clearance, you don't want to do that research because, you know, come on, this is, you know, you've gone through those. So that's a challenge. I mean, one is not saying it should not be done. Each ethics committee should certainly look at each proposal in the way that they think it's right. But for the investigator, doing these ethics, these studies, it becomes a big challenge. And so, I mean, a few things that that come to one's mind is that if you could, and I'm sure this has been discussed by the people like Roli, Dr. Muthuswamy, all of you, that if you could have for multi-institutional studies, centers being involved, if you could have a format for a common ethics committee. Now, this common ethics committee could be in two ways. Either you say that the center which is doing the study, coordinating the study, becomes the in charge, becomes the coordinating ethics committee, and the members or a representative of the other institutions feed into this in terms of either advice or feedback of some kind. Or it could just be a committee which is formed by representatives, and that is the one that then continues to monitor the study. One problem I know that the people watching this program, hearing on, would say, what happens to clinical trials and you have SAEs? Who becomes responsible for that? And in that case, I guess what comes to one's mind is that, again, you have a representation from each center, and that center takes care of, and that person takes care of the SAEs from that particular unit. So these are just some thoughts. These are challenges which we face, and you know, we certainly want some inputs and some discussion on that.
Thank you, Dr. Bhatnagar. Following that up, it would be good to have kind of a connection between the various ethics secretariats across institutions to enable this process. And I would like Dr. Bhatnagar's view on how does she see that how this pandemic, especially the situation like pandemic, would help an investigator like her if there are trained research managers like dealing with various aspects of her research that she has undertaken.
Yeah, thank you, Vidya. Again, a very, very important question. And you know, I was first at All India Institute of Medical Sciences, and I moved to THSTI. So I was fortunate to be able to help in building an institution. And one of the things that we recognized very early there was that we should have a defined role, a person who has a defined role as a research manager, somebody who can actually look after this area and help the investigators to be able to do their research seamlessly. So we constituted a small division. We started 10 years back, so we constituted a division, and we were fortunate to have Vidya join us. And what was good is we had somebody who had a lot of knowledge in science, and that helps when you have somebody who has a scientific background or a background which is consistent with what work the institute wants to do, and then you kind of mold and train that person to be able to develop that whole secretariat or that whole division. And of course, we got a lot of help from many people who are here in the panel on that. So what happens is that you get a focused person, a person who becomes a research enabler. Of course, there can be a lot of debate, and we've gone through this debate, whether this research enabler should also be a researcher. That's a question that that person has to decide for herself or himself, or the institution has to decide for that. But this person becomes really the pivot of research in that institute, and we've seen that happen at THSTI. We are a multidisciplinary group, so we had within THSTI a person who kept the bridge between various disciplines. And also, because the training and the focus was for this domain, that bridge becomes a bridge with other institutions. And I remember reaching out to Savita very early when Vidya helped and went, you know, developed this whole program. So you have bridges with people who also have these secretariat. And I feel one of the things that a message to all the investigators, and I think Pooja would agree in that, this is one of the most important areas, domains, secretariat to develop in your institution if you want to do research. In terms of, I had jotted down some points. I just want to say that not only is this research enabler someone for your own institute, but when you're setting up or collaborating with other institutes and setting up programs, this person can also help you set up the ethics secretariat in other institutes. And that's what we saw happen. Then, of course, all that Roly said, all the documentation, all the infrastructure, the training that goes behind it pretty much is very mandatory for this person. In terms of what happened in the pandemic, because we had a system like this, we were able to reach out to the funding agencies, be able to coordinate with the funding agencies, and that could happen because our research management system was able to do it with the funding agencies. You know, the investigators were busy setting up the research program and the clinical program, but we had a system and who could reach out, build bridges with the funding agencies, get all the documents in time, get all the ethics permissions in time, and actually get work started. I mean, we have a huge COVID cohort that we've been able to initiate within a month of the pandemic because of systems being in place. So I think it's very, very crucial to have someone like this to bridge. And training in this area, Roly, is something, like you said, is absolutely crucial. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Bhatt. Thank you very much. This is to basically to highlight the importance of training a research enablers and managers in this particular area of research ethics in various institutions. This is to bring out that point from a researcher. And next, my questions are to Dr. Pooja Sharma, who, as I mentioned, who is a researcher as well as a research enabler. Dr. Sharma, you represent the private institute Medanta, and in your experience, you have seen lots of clinical trials happening in your organization. I would like to hear from you, as the research administrative system, how does it function to enable this operations in your institute? How has this contributed? And did you feel, especially during this pandemic, was there a positive impact you and your team felt in enabling this process? And I request Dr. Sharma to share her views, and also request the India Alliance organizers to please play her slide to so that she can address this.
Okay. Thank you so much. It is an immense pleasure to be speaking on this really esteemed forum. Dr. Muthuswamy, Dr. Bhatnagar have been my mentors, and Roly, if I may count as my peer mentor. So we've worked. It's been an exciting time. And so research managers, I luckily had this opportunity, as Dr. Shinjini was saying, to actually start off a research unit at Medanta. And I believe the critical role has been played by the research managers in this exercise. Can I have the next slide, please? Can I take? Okay. So just as a quick, this is just to share how our institution has grown. So when the institution started 10 years back, much of our research was focused on clinical trials and some minor student research. But over 10 years, what we've seen is now the research is more focused on academic research, innovation, and of course, the student research continues. So clinical trials have declined, especially wherein they are only giving one patient or two patients in a clinical trial. So either the clinical trial, we are national leads, or we are actually driving the clinical trials ourselves. So this change has happened, I think, a lot because of the research enabler and the research manager. Can I have the next slide, please? I'm going to ask you to skip over this, except I want you to just highlight the investigator pool that has changed. So earlier, most of our investigators 10 years back were those who were interested remotely in research. So something comes up, we will participate in research. Now, most of them are actually academic PIs. There are a few who are trialists and very few who are partly interested in research. So most of the people are now begun to do their own research. Next, please. I think we can skip this slide. So in the 10 years, our peer-reviewed publications have increased from 50 almost to 300, 320 publications. Our research funding has drastically increased. Our research team structure has changed. So earlier we had only research operations, research coordinator level people. So we're just taking data, collecting data. Now we have a research management, research administration, we have regulatory affairs teams, we have a medical writing team, and we have slightly more data management team, and not just data entry, but really looking at our own intramural research and our own data to actually extrapolate it further. Next slide, please. I think the most important role that has been played by the research manager is here. We have handheld and made research easy for the researcher, because investigators actually do not have that much time or bandwidth to look at the paperwork associated with research. So what we've done is we put up a separate startup team. These guys, we have standardized documentation. So we have standardized our documentation as much as possible. Our negotiation, scientific, ethical, regulatory review, paperwork is all done by one startup team. There's a separate grant management team to help the investigator manage the grant, put out the timelines, ensure things are put up, reminders are there, and so that the investigator is not focusing on these nitty-gritty and not being able to focus on the research. We have in the last 2 years focused a lot on data management teams and continuing quality improvement. For continuing quality improvement, I must emphasize that there's something that we do call CREATE, that's continuing research, education, and training exercises. This is something which emphasizes ethics to not only all our student researchers, but of course any investigator researchers. As well as we have expanded this to collaborative universities. So we are working with several universities students. So we have pharmacy students, we have a lot of students from clinical research, we have students from nursing, we have students from different areas, but we have made mandatory clinical research cannot be conducted without bioethics training and research methodology training. So we have 10 mandatory modules which are conducted for each person who comes to our research unit for any participation of anything, whether they're coming for internship or any other program. Next slide, please. The one thing that we have also always tried to do, and this has been emphasized a lot by our ethics committee, is the role of the research participant. And Dr. Vasanta may remember this 10 years back, we had started this PARTAKE. This is patient awareness of research, therapeutic advancements, knowledge and empowerment. So we work on creation of awareness of research via several advocacy groups. We have even supported advocacy groups to actually create their own ethics committees. So one of those ethics committees actually has been supported, is much smarter than my ethics committee because it's a paperless ethics committee. My ethics committee is still using paper. So their ethics committee is doing a very fantastic job by being paperless. And we have worked with patient support groups such as in type 1 diabetics. We have worked in childhood cancer. We are working in breast cancer. We are working in rheumatology to create patient awareness of research. We may forget celebration of any event, but we definitely remember to celebrate the one day in which the patients are to be appreciated. That's the clinical trials day. So we do that celebration every year and we ensure our patients are supported and appreciated. To expand this PARTAKE, last year we have actually expanded to call a program called Yes Sir, which is Youth for Ethical, Scientific, Socially Relevant Indian Research. This is a program which we are launching more for debates, discussions, so that nobody, like Roli said correctly, that even, it's not only science students who have the responsibility for research. It should be part of everybody, whether it is social sciences students, whether it's art students, awareness of research must happen. So we put out small programs for universities and we do debate competitions, we do some, discussions, we have some trophies and things like that. But this is something that it ensures that ethics stays in the system. It is something that grows with the people. It is not something that comes, as an external understanding of just guidelines, which I feel is very, very critical, that it has to be incorporated in the system itself. The COVID research experience, as Dr. Shinjini said, is, ours has been useful because already existing system existed. We have data management teams who are already keeping an eye on the HIS. And we had, during this time, we have treated almost 65,000 people. with COVID disease, and there was a massive cohort over almost 12 months. So from the first patients who came in with COVID, that was that group of Italian people who were having COVID admitted at our hospital. From that, every data has been captured. Every month, the data is presented to the CMD, it is presented to the CEO. So we have certain guidelines. So the data, the research team is driving management. What drugs were being used, what drugs are the latest research that is happening, what are the new drugs that the ICU-X team is using, ICU-Y's team is not using, whether we should use, convalescent plasma or not, is there any research around it? We were providing that research data to all our investigators and even clinicians. So I think the research team played a very, very critical role during this COVID time. And the research managers did, I think, much of the heavy lifting. So it's kudos to research managers and researchers who can make experience like COVID successful in India. I mean, the fact that it has managed to limit compared to the rest of the world is credit to them. So Vidya, I hope that answers some of your questions.
Thank you very much. It answer. I would have similar questions now to our panelist, Dr. Madhuri Dutta, who has a wide experience in enabling research. Madhuri, in your institute, how does research managers play a role in compliance to ethics and biosafety? And how has this pandemic, the impact of pandemic in shaping these roles, and did you feel your team had a positive role to play in your institute? Please share your views on it.
First of all, Vidya, thank you for having me here. And indeed, it's a privilege for me to be on this panel and learn so much. Regarding research managers' role, actually, I relate to what Dr. Roli Mathur said because I'm part of the secretariat. Yes, we do all the heavy lifting for all the ethics application. But at George, actually, the institutional ethics committee is made up of 11 members. 10 of them are external members, and there is the member secretariat. He's from George, and he's the director of research. So the secretariat consists of the director of research, who's the member secretariat, me as the research manager, and I also have another colleague with me. So between the three of us, actually, we coordinate application submission from the researchers, help them with the application process. We sort of supervise if the application documentation is properly done or not. And we also oversee the online review as well as the face-to-face meetings that we used to have with the ethics committee at one point of time. Now, in addition to that, the research manager also has to do the registrations with DHR and the DCGI. So fortunately or unfortunately, the moment I entered George, I had to do both the renewal of the DCGI and also the DHR documentation. Probably I can help other research managers as well do that. Then the third thing that the research manager also has to do is when we apply for HMSC approvals, that documentation also sort of we help the researchers put up the documentation together. If we are applying for an NOC under DCGI, that documentation also I help put up. So these are in a gist, and also the approval letters that go out from the secretariat, we help with that documentation as well. Now, regarding COVID, because if we have listened to the speakers from yesterday and all our colleagues, we know that there was a rush of COVID-related grants, and all institutes were actually trying to manage ethics approvals, and we also did the same. So what happened was we looked at the documentation that was given up by ICMR. There was an SOP and also a guidance on COVID-related documentation. So we went by that. Previously, all our consenting process, and as you know, a public health research organization like ours relies on field study and field data collection. And so face-to-face data collection was not possible. And so we, changed the consenting process to audio and video consenting. We were very mindful about our own staff going into the field, so that halted many of the projects, but we were always finding out ways of how to still, go on with our research program during the COVID time. So as the research manager, and the secretariat personnel, we also did a lot in terms of training our IEC members, making them more aware of it. And it really helped because they were all from different organizations. Some of them are from hospitals as well. So they also told us about what kind of ethics, management at their institute goes on. So that was a good learning experience. So as a result of COVID, the ethics committee started meeting every month instead of once in 2 months, so that we could clear a lot of things. And also because George Institute, because of the work that we do with different states and districts, we were already sort of technology savvy before the COVID itself. So there's a lot of, meetings that were occurring online through Zoom. So we didn't really have to do any sort of special accommodation for technology as such. So that really helped during the COVID. And now it's a regular affair that we do the meetings online through Zoom. And we also have like a shared drive where we put in all the applications for the committee members to review. So these are some of the things that the research managers are involved in. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, it did. Thank you very much. Now we will take a few questions from the audience, and I thank all the panelists for their great involvement and participation. The first question is about a lot of questions on the Health Ministry Screening Committee. I will direct 1 or 2 of these questions to Dr. Mathur. So the question is HMSC is like required at the time of application, or should it wait after approval, is one question. Though I answered it, I would want Dr. Mathur's comment on it.
So,
at the time of grant submission or approval, which is like, should they wait for the grant to be funded to go for HMSC, or should they apply yearly, is one such question.
Well, all the various agencies and authorities would like to have a documentation that is final, So they would not like to review a proposal that is still in a peer review stage and it has not yet been approved. And they would like to see that the grant has been approved and how much is the money that they are receiving, because when you fill up that format, all those questions will come up. There have to be some memorandum of understanding that have to be signed. The material transfer agreements have to be signed. So, considering all that, it would have to be a proposal that is approved. And that is why, this is sequential. I'm also applying at the moment for have applied for a HMSC, this thing, but I have to wait for my ethics committee to give me the approval before I can submit. So it is, of course, we all want a one single window, a system of, approvals, because many of the things are connected. But then at the moment, the kind of system we have is that it's one after the other. So I'm trying to register it on CTRI, but they have also not, registered it, because till I get the ethics committee approval, I cannot register on CTRI platform as well. So, these are some of the challenges I think we have to face. But if we are alert, if we know that what all we have to do, if we are familiar with the procedures, it can be done fast. The problem comes only when our documentation is incomplete. So what I've heard from people is there are one set of people who say HMSC delays, but there is another group of people who say, no, it's very prompt and it has happened within a month for them. And probably that is because the way you apply and you fill your forms completely And the meetings are now very frequently happening, so things will get cleared. So I think good preparation will be useful. Thank you. If you have all your documents ready, it should help. And same is for ethics committee, like I said, if the documentation is complete, the ethics committee will also give approval fast. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I have a question to Dr. Muthuswamy. There is a participant who is asking how to keep track of new guidelines. This is a question which is posed by one of the participants. I think possibly worried about compliance and.
Yeah. Yes. One is, of course, if you look at you have to know what for the kind of studies which are doing, which are the agencies which come out with guidelines you should know. They want to do anything related.
I think we have lost her.
Connection for ma'am,
yeah. Okay.
Maybe I'll continue while she's connecting.
Can
you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, we could hear you. Yes, please. Yes.
So you have to keep looking at those websites to see that anything new which is coming up. If anything to do with the stem cell research, the guidelines come in the ICMR website. So there are certain like a CDSCO website, the ICMR main ICMR headquarters Delhi website, the NCDIR website. Okay. So and if you want to do anything, if you are working on the animal experimentation, then you have to be looking at the CPCA guidelines. Anything to do with the recombinant products, you have to look at the DBT website. So these are the agencies which are coming out with regulations and the guidelines. So depending on your area of work, you have to constantly keep looking at these websites to see is there anything new coming up. By the time something comes up and then you come to know, it may take time. It's easy because all the agencies immediately upload the documents. Okay. So you have to keep on looking at them. You should not wait for somebody else to tell you that yes, something new has come. You should be the first one to see, find something new has come. In fact, you can inform the others also there is a new such guideline has come out. Guys, I remember the day the 2020 this COVID guidelines was uploaded. I think the same.
I think we lost ma'am for.
Vidya also seems to be paused.
If the other panelists would like to add to that, that would be great. Dr. Mathur, do you want to say something on that?
I'm tempted to answer that because it's really hard. I mean, this question is very good because there is no single this thing. Anyway, we are trying our best to put all the relevant documents related to biomedical health research on our website. So if you just Google ICMR bioethics, you will get to our website where we are posting all the updates. And also, I think now it's time for people to get on Twitter. I have found Twitter to be very useful. You follow the right agencies, you can get the update quite promptly. So I think I found that to be useful. Even we all have to keep in, because you don't know when which agency is releasing what guideline. So I think,
yes.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes. Following that up, there was a question about is there a common online portal for all the regulatory agency registrations? The answer is this, it's no, but still I would want the panelists to comment on it because these are regulated by various other bodies. Dr. Mathur, would you like to say something on that?
India is a very complex, it's a very big country. We have so many ministries. And actually, if you see health research, it is not only health ministry, it's Ministry of Science and Technology, Women and Child, and so many ministries are involved in various ways. So it is not that easy to keep track of all this. And I don't think we have any common portal at the moment. But yeah, it's a good suggestion for us to see how we can harmonize with each other. So with THSTI, for example, we have jointly worked on common forms, and they are trying to digitalize these common forms. And also they are preparing the electronic EC formats. So I think we're really working, trying to work together for all that. And to the point that Dr. Shinjini had made about the common review of ethics committee review, the 2017 guidelines has already created provisions for common review of multi-center research. And it is now for ethics committees to be a little proactive in trying to implement that. And we have tried to pilot it in some institutions, but we have found challenges because many institutions don't agree. They say, why should this ethics committee be the main and I should not be the main? And then there is this issue about local oversight, because there's some degree of, so the local ethics committees also need to be involved, and they cannot be totally, not be taken into this thing. So basically the review can be done by main committee, but then local ethics committees also have a role. And this coordination, because we don't have communication between ethics committees at the moment. This communication is through the investigator, and that is why there are challenges. So unless ethics committees are more proactive, talk to each other, we can improve that. And I think Dr. Shinjini wants to say something. You can unmute yourself.
Did?
Yes, we could hear you.
Okay. I agree with you that these policies these committees and guidelines have been put, the guidelines for these committees have been put in place. But the challenge is actually who's going to start the implementation of this. I think just having it on paper or proposing these guidelines is all very good, and it should be done. But I mean, if I'm representing the investigators in this panel, I think the question they'll ask is that who's going to start this process? I mean, this has to come as a process which is top down. It's not going to be possible, really, that these things are put in place by local ethics committees talking to each other. It's just not going to happen. So I think this is a step which has to come top down. Yeah. Playing the devil's advocate.
A few more questions. Few more questions. Like I would request Dr. Pooja and Dr. Madhuri to pitch in. There's a question about, will this initiative, the IRMI initiative, will enable training of the ethics secretariat? From the organizer side, we would love to. These are some things which we plan later on. It will take us some more time to move on in that directions, but that is in the plan. But I would invite the panelists to comment. What do you think? Starting with Madhuri and then with Dr. Pooja. What do you think if we enable this through the initiative of training of the secretariat? Madhuri?
I think this will be wonderful, especially, I'm a little jealous that you guys in THSTI are getting that electronic submission process done. And I want to learn how to do that and implement within my own organization. So I'm ready, to be a part of this. And
Dr. Pooja?
Of course, Vidya, it will be awesome. It will be really, really nice.
We'll talk about it. Yes, to the participant, yes, that's an interest. Yes.
Can I say something, Vidya, here?
Yes, Dr. Muthuswamy, please.
Yes. See, I'm the president of the Forum for Ethics Review Committees in India. Okay. So we used to, quite a number of years back, of course, we started this training for IC Secretariat. Because what is important is when we talk of all this documentation and everything, and this is a responsibility, as Rolly explained clearly, that the Secretariat's job. Now, nobody is, when they get into the job, they have no idea about what is all this thing they are getting into. Okay, they got a job, they have come here, then they realize the enormous responsibility which is put on their head. So we thought at the time that the training of the IEC Secretariat is a very important component if an ethics committee has to function well. So we started the program, we did a couple of them. And then of course, over a period of time, of course, funding is required. And then we are all, all volunteers coming from different organizations who have made this NGO. So then somehow it didn't work out. But I think it's a good thing under the IRMI, if you people can do that. See, we have the wherewithal, we can give you the guidance as to actually how the training has to be done, because there are some international training also for the secretariats, which we all have participated. So we can always do that because it's a very important component. See, now that the ethics committees have to be registered with the regulators, whether it is a DHR or a CDSCO, it's important. And then of course we have started the procedures of registration, accreditation also. So it's very important that the processing is perfect and everything is done properly. It makes the life of course, the ethics committee members and investigators, everybody is easy, as Pooja explained. If an IRB manager or a management system is properly functioning, the rest of their life of rest of the people is very easy. So this has to be done. If IRMI can start it, of course, from the FERC as well as from the all of us, we can definitely help you to see that how it can be done. And as far as the question of Madhuri about the EC, see, the EC ethics committee also, EEC was started by the FERC, and we have handed it over to TISTI and the CDSAO for taking it further across the country. So it was started by us, and then we did a lot of collaboration with PAC to put that in place. It has reached a level now that it can be disseminated through the country. Okay, so it's a massive exercise which is going on, and once people start working on it, you will realize that how easy the life has become. I think now in that way, I think the COVID pandemic indirectly is a boon to us in many ways. Although the other problems are there, of course, all of us are facing. I have not stepped out of my house for last 10 months. Now all those things are happening. But I think the online way of conducting the program, even having regular ethics committee, Rolly can tell you the Central Ethics Committee is now the average time is 24 to 48 hours. We meet every third day, we are meeting to clear proposals. So we know now how to effectively, efficiently do an online job. And so the ethics committee also, which we started the EEC, about 50 institutes are working on that, and they find the life very easy. So COVID has compelled even the other people now to accept this online EC management system, and so this is by force it has come because of COVID. But I think this is going to become the new normal now. That I think slowly all the institutions will accept it because it's going to make life very easy. And second is it will be very environment friendly. We don't have to have so many papers to be destroyed, and so it's more environment friendly system. And I'm sure that, of course, you need little training. People have to be trained. The secretary is trained. The ethics committee members have to be trained. The researchers have to be trained. Of course, it's all part of the system. Once you put in a new system, automatically the training component will be part of it. That's going to make a lot of difference. Now, since TISTI and CDSA has taken up this responsibility of doing that, and since you are the people who are organizing this program, I think you can take up this responsibility of two things. One is training for secretariat. The other one is training of the EEC for the different stakeholders. And this is needed in a big way in this country, not for one or two institutions which are interested to do that. It's actually, we need a national level training program for these two activities. If that can be taken up by you all as a follow-up action, I think that will be wonderful.
Thank you. I will inform CDSA about this. Thank you for your response. One final, yes, Dr. Pooja, yes.
Vidya, can I have one last stake, because to meet ma'am and Rolly on the same group is not easy. So can you please, I wanted to know if the NABH accreditation for ethics committees, what is the stake, what is the status?
Yeah, I'll tell you something. See, when the whole thing started, the accreditation of the ethics committee is by the CDSCO, okay? Anything when you start, you have a very ambitious plan, The same thing happened with the CDSCO also. So when the registration procedure started 2013, if you remember, is the Ranjit Roy Chaudhary committee which made the recommendation. I was part of that committee which made the recommendation. That was the one committee which was formed in February, report submitted in July, and the implementation started in September. Okay, it is that fast committee is functioning in the sense that the activity was taken up by the health ministry seriously, and the CDSCO registration started in September 2013. Now, so at the time, the CDSCO had a feeling that all those ethics committees which are reviewing the regulatory clinical trial will have to be registered. Not registration is not enough; they should be accredited. Of course, it's naturally your natural follow-up, your quality improvement, quality assurance is not enough. Quality improvement is necessary. So accreditation is one of the mechanisms. So they made it. In fact, it was thought at that time point that from 2019 January, by 2019 January, all ECs have to be also accredited with NABH. Of course, so they gave the responsibility to NABH as a that they will start it. The program started also, but only when you start the accreditation, they realize it's not a very easy thing to do. It's a very, very difficult, tough job to do accreditation, because all the ethics committees' quality of functioning varies from 0 to 100%. Of course, nothing is 100%. You can say 0 to 80% or 90% is the extent of the functioning of the ethics committees. And accreditation can happen only the best performing ethics committees can get the accreditation. That's why if you see the number now, the CDSCO registered ethics committees are about 1,500, but the NABH accredited ethics committees are about 150. So that means that out of 1,500, only 150 have got NABH accreditation. The others have realized it's not possible. The NABH itself has realized it's a very tough job, it cannot be done. And the CDSCO, which was supposed to make it mandatory from January 2019, is now keeping quiet. Now they say it's not mandatory. If you want to do it, it's fine. If you don't want to do it, that's also fine. Now we have other programs for accreditation. From the first C, we conduct the Sitka recognition program, which is again a voluntary activity, which is much more in detail than the NABH. Then of course, the internationally you have the AHRP accreditation by the US group. That's also there. So now those institutions, ethics committees which want to be sure of their quality functioning in a continuous manner, they can go for any of the accreditation programs. NABH is not mandatory. People have to understand. You know, some people give a false impression. If I registered with the CDSCO, you have to go for NABH accreditation, and indirectly there are people working on this to make people go through this. Actually, it's not necessary. Of course, if you do it, it's a good thing, because you know that there's certain qualities being maintained better. That's all. It is definitely not mandatory. It is not going to become mandatory as far as I know for the next couple of years. Maybe after some time. In the whole world, nowhere accreditation is mandatory. Accreditation is always a voluntary activity that if you want. If you take, for example, the Tata Memorial Hospital in Bombay, which is a government institution, they have NABH accreditation, they have Sitka recognition, they have AHRP accreditation also. And the director there says, if you bring some more accreditation program, we are ready to go through that, because we want to prove and show to people that we are interested in quality and quality assurance, not only quality assurance and the quality improvement. We are ready to go through any number of accreditation programs which will make our system perfect. So it all depends on how people look at it.
We are at our time. Yes, and I thank very sincere thanks to all the panelists. Your presence has made this discussion very useful to all the participants. My sincere thank you to each one of you. And with this, I close this session. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you.